Greetings, cats and kittens. Welcome to Libby's Lullabies. I'm Miss Libby, and today I am going to be reading Mr. Archie is Missing by Bailey Moore. What's so cool about this book is that Bailey Moore was 9 years old when he wrote it. How cool is that, to be a published author at 9 years old? So sit back or lay down. Either way, just relax and enjoy Mr. Archie is Missing. Meet Jerry. Jerry Jones always enjoyed being the center of attention at Moore Academy. He was an only child, and at his school, he enjoyed playing jokes on his friends and teachers. He especially enjoyed playing practical jokes in the history class taught by Mr. Archie. One time, Jerry put toothpaste in a bag of Oreos that belonged to his friend Brandon. Another time, Jerry put whoopee cushions in everyone's chair. Jerry laughed so hard that day. He even put itching powder in Brandon's new shirt and scared another friend, Jeremiah, in the dark hallway when bad weather made the lights go out. Mr. Archie was the students' favorite teacher at Moore Academy. He was the type of teacher who wasn't too strict, but he was respected all around by the students and the faculty. Although Jerry loved history, he had a reputation to uphold as being the school's funniest kid in 3rd grade. Every Friday was Mr. Archie's history class, and Jerry would go into the room ready to be the class clown. He could pull the funniest pranks, and Mr. Archie would never send him to the office. Mr. Archie believed in the students expressing themselves. Okay. Today was about Black history. Mr. Archie was halfway into the history lesson about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when Jerry gave out a big burp. Burp. The whole class burst into laughter. "Who was that?" asked Mr. Archie. Jerry didn't say a word, but he looked at Mr. Archie with a slick grin. Normally, he was an easygoing teacher and would let it go. This time, Jerry could see in Mr. Archie's eyes he had had enough of him disrupting the class. He said, "One day you will regret your actions, Jerry." Jerry rolled his eyes and looked around the class for approval and confirmation that he was indeed the funniest kid in 3rd grade. That night, Jerry put on his pajamas. He could not sleep. He couldn't get that look that Mr. Archie had in his eyes out of his head. As he drifted to sleep, he thought about how badly he felt. When it was time for history class again, Jerry walked down the hall. He didn't see Mr. Archie at the door, where he normally greeted the students. He didn't hear any sounds coming from the classroom where the children usually would be playing and talking. But like clockwork, Jerry entered into Mr. Archie's class, ready for the laughter of approval from his fellow classmates. But this time, something felt differently. Instead of Mr. Archie, he saw a creature. "Hi, I'm Mr. Stanley, your teacher," the creature said. Jerry was surprised. Actually, the whole class was surprised. A big jaguar was the teacher. The jaguar smiled and showed his sharp teeth. How could this be? Where was Mr. Archie? Class went by slowly. Jerry thought to himself, "I'm not scared of a jaguar." He tried to think of the funniest thing he could do to get his friends to laugh. He decided to mock everything the new teacher did behind his back, but nothing worked. No one laughed. However, the jaguar did react. He saw Jerry and growled at the top of his lungs. "Jerry, go to the office right now." His eyes appeared evil. Jerry left the class quickly and ran to the principal's office. When he arrived, the principal said, "Jerry, I'm surprised you're in here." Jerry was surprised as well. He had never gotten in trouble, in spite of all of his foolish pranks. He tried to tell the principal, Mrs. Harvey, that the new teacher was a jaguar, but she wouldn't listen. Instead, she called his parents and they put him on punishment. That whole week went by so slowly. Jerry thought if Mr. Archie was here, this would never have happened. And what about his friends? Why didn't they notice Mr. Stanley was a jaguar? When next Friday came, Jerry hoped Mr. Stanley was not in the classroom, but as he entered the door, he saw the furry Mr. Stanley writing again on the chalkboard. He looked at Jerry with those same eyes and told him to sit in the corner. Jerry was mad, and he had an attitude. He sat in the back of the class. He was bored and thought about how Mr. Archie would have been telling cool stories about history and showing the class all of the special items he had collected. Jerry really missed Mr. Archie and wished he had never disrupted his class. He wished he could show Mr. Archie how important he was to him. When school was over, Jerry was happy. He said to himself, "I hope I never see that Mr. Stanley again." When Friday rolled around, Jerry was nervous about history class. Again, Mr. Stanley was there. Every Friday, he had the same mean stare, and he always seemed to pick on Jerry and send him to the office. It had been weeks since Mr. Archie was in history class. Jerry was tired of being picked on. Still, every Friday he got into trouble. One day, as he was walking out of the school, he noticed a sign that said, "One day you will regret your actions." And it hit Jerry. Mr. Archie was right. He regretted how he always disrupted the class. He wanted another chance to prove to Mr. Archie that he could change. As he looked at the sign again, the bell rang. Or so he thought. When he looked at himself, he was still in his pajamas. It was all a dream. Jerry rushed to get ready for school. He brushed his teeth, washed his face, put on his clothes, said goodbye to his parents, and ran to school. As he walked to Mr. Archie's class, he saw his favorite teacher standing at the door. Jerry ran to Mr. Archie and gave him a big hug and apologized. Jerry told Mr. Archie about his dream. Jerry and Mr. Archie talked and laughed until it was time for class to begin. Jerry learned a valuable lesson. From that day on, he treated others with respect. Well, what do you think? It's pretty groovy to read a story that was written by a 9-year-old. Tell me, if you were to write a story, what would you write? Why don't you DM me on Libby's Lullabies or email me at libby'slullabies@gmail.com. I would love to hear what your story would be like. I know a young lady that makes the most amazing lemonade here in Houston. Her name is Victoria, and I'm curious how she got started. I would like to hear her story. I would like to hear your story as well. I want you guys to enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, your week or your weekend, and I will see you next time on Libby's Lullabies. Cheers.